Well, here we are. We're in our last video, and we've been on this journey of taking 3 simple steps. 1 is determine where you are. Number 2, what is our next steps? But the third is to then determine what is our fruit. Now, we really believe that as we embed these disciple-making values into the culture of our groups, we will see God move in incredible ways and see the fruit of transformed lives. And so what we're going to hear now is the story from Nitin and his family. And we're going to hear the story of also how a few individuals from our church and their group and how God had used them to bring about this change and transformation in their life. You'll hear about how some of these disciple-making values were at work. It was an everyday moment that God had used and worked through for him to connect with Nitin, and how as a group they expressed and revealed more of Jesus together than they ever could alone. Now, this story is very personal. He's being very vulnerable, and it's pretty raw. And so we just really want to, first of all, thank Nitin and the family for sharing, but we want to encourage everyone to be as respectful about their vulnerability and their story.
So my younger son, Ara, was detected with autism, and it was a really hard thing for us to accept. From where we come back in India, mental health is a subject that you don't touch upon, you don't talk about, you don't want to know about it. Pretty much I am a person who would discuss something once, think about it, cry about it, get over it and move on. I don't like to ponder on things, but unfortunately I didn't know that was what was going on in Nitin's mind, that he was constantly thinking about what next. One fine day, Nitin just broke down and he wasn't himself, because I started noticing that he was getting short-tempered. He didn't want to interact with the kids. He didn't want to spend time with us as a family. He started isolating himself. He went down to see a psychologist, and I had to accompany at that stage. In my mind, I'm thinking, what's wrong? Why is it to the extent that we need to see a psychologist? Like, what's so wrong with our lives that we can't handle it? So when we went to the psychologist, that's the first time that I saw Nitin really breaking down and talking about Arav and how he really felt about the whole situation. And that's when I realized that, okay, we are going to go through some difficult times. So things are not as good as they seem.
I met Nitin last year at the beginning of the year because our 2 kids were in the same class. So I used to meet him at the pick-up and the drop-off, and we used to chit-chat with each other with all the other parents that were doing the drop-off and pick-up. After dinner, we used to Tang and I used to bring the boys to the school to just run around and play soccer. And there was one night that we did that, and there was no one around, but there was one guy that was walking around the oval. And then when I looked closely, it was actually Nitin. And at that stage, Tang and Nitin hadn't met yet, but that night I introduced them to each other.
So after Amanda introduced us, we started talking, and we're talking on quite a shallow level, like, how are you, what do you do, and all this sort of stuff. But as we kept talking, I just was kind of prompted to ask him, how are you doing? And that's when I think it struck a chord with Nitin, and he just started opening up about some of the challenges that he was facing and going through right now. I just felt like here was a guy who was going through a lot, and he kind of really needed someone just to be there with him. I asked him if I could pray for him and his family, and he gave me that permission, and so that's when we started praying for Nitin. And after that, Nitin told me how helpful it was, and I asked him whether or not he'd like to meet up again, and that's when we started meeting up on a more regular basis and sharing and journeying together.
I think it's more about listening, had someone to listen to, and I think straight away came connected, because I was struggling internal. I was trying to understand what's wrong with me. Because I was grieving about my son. I didn't know what's next for me or for my family. And I think that day, because that's what I was doing, I was trying to, help myself. And even that, having that discussion with Teng and having that talk made me realize that I am going through a lot of stress, anxiety, and depression. But I think out of that discussion, that laugh, like I think we're talking, and I think the key part where Teng just made me feel comfortable that I could talk to someone. So I think we talked for about 3 hours, and I just felt nice for some reason. I think that's where I connected straight away. I said, like, what are the chances of someone meeting at 7 o'clock at evening on a ground and talking about, my life? What are the chances? So I believe that's where my belief started with, there is God and He's here to help. So I went back, I spoke to Veena, and I told her first thing, now this is making me feel better. And that talk with Teng made me feel good. So, and I said, I want to do more of this. And I think that's where our journey started together. And I think Teng helped me in a couple of things. Like, one, how should I, try and work on this depression? It's not something easy. And I believe the other connection was Teng related that he went through something very similar and how he worked through it and how I should do it as well. And I think that helped me as to what should I do, what are my next steps. So we kept meeting each other, and I believe Teng was always there in terms of, we used to catch up early, like in the mornings, when we used to come and drop the kids. He used to say, how are you going? Just that one question of how are you going made me feel like, oh, I'm good, I feel better today. And I think that made me connect. Just having that was good. And I believe it slowly went into discussions where Teng was like, oh, we've got this life groups. And we talk about our lives, our journey, and how we help each other in this community. And I think that's something which I wanted at that point of time, because I was grieving about my son. And there was someone else who was going through the same in that life group. And I still remember that was evening, I think around the same time, 6, 7 o'clock, the whole life group came here. We're all sitting here. That person was so interactive, and she literally bought a book saying, Nitin, this is going to help you. Read about depression, read about how you can, hold back or how you can work through your life. And it's really good. Do it in your bedtime. So I believe I took a lot of tools from Teng, and it was just, everything which I got from there was good for me, because I started seeing how important it was, and it was healing me from inside. And I think that's what was better of it, is I'm getting healed. There's a power here which is telling me that this is good. Again, my background is I'm a Hindu. So Christianity, my wife is a Christian, but it was never that we followed each other's religion. There was never that, we shouldn't follow E. So it was all good. But this was something was driving me or, pulling me towards. And the more I met Amanda, the more I met Teng, it just made me feel comfortable. You wouldn't believe it. At that point of time, I was still struggling, and I was taking medications, and I didn't want to do it. And I told Veena, I don't want to take medications, because I was scared that if I take medications, I'm going to be with it for the rest, my life. And I don't like that. I want something which is natural and needs to happen. So I said, but it didn't work. I took medications for a week. I had to increase my dose. And I think that morning, I went to the doctor to increase my dose. And I bought that back. Once the dose, we was like, all right, I'm going to take this night, but I've got a life group. So we had the men's life group that evening. I talked about all my burden that, I have to look after my kids, I have to look after Veena, I have to do this, I have to do that. And I think there was one thing that Teng told me is that, Nitin, you've got too much burden on yourself. You need to release it. And he said, you can't sustain this for long. And I said, okay, so what do I need to do? He said, you need to pray. You need to let it out. You need to get Jesus in your life so He can take the load from you. And I said, okay, I'll try and do it. And I think we prayed. And again, I think it was a big miracle for me because that night I told Veena that something has let gone. Like it's like someone has lifted all my evil thoughts or all my fears. And I think that's what was a big change in me. Next day I was like, oh, this feels normal. This feels like I'm back. Like this is 6 months back, Nitin back there. Like literally I felt like this is great. And I told Veena, I think if this is what it is, and if this is what Jesus is telling us to do, I'm happy. I want to go for it. I think the day or two I met you, and I told you the same story, and you went like, oh, this is big. So we prayed, and ever after that, I think it's a journey which has happened, and where we've got our kids involved. They come to the church. We pray every day at night before dinner, and it's brought us as a family together. It started from Ting, and I think today I'm a better person because now I try and help others at my workplace or maybe be any friends. I try and understand how I could make a life better or change someone. So yeah, that's been my journey with these guys. Before you ask forgiveness from God, that opened my eyes. I was just thinking, how many of us forgive others before we ask this to the God? And I think that changed my whole thinking. And I was like, that's so true. In our lives, we are so hold up. We so think about ego. It's about every other person. Oh, he's better. I think that opened our eyes, saying, why do we do this? And I've got cousins here who have lived here for 15, 20 years. And we've not talked to them for maybe the 15 years of our life. And I think that day I told Veena, we need to change this. Doesn't matter what, we're going to pick up the phone and we're going to call my sister and we're going to say, we are sorry for what has happened and we need to connect. And I think that changed our lives, where we called them up, we connected, and today we talk. So I think that was such a big blessing of forgiving others before you ask forgiveness from God. And I think that, and every week I took something out of what Pastor She said, and I used to put it in practice straight away. And I think Teng and Amanda, again, Teng, you should, what you could learn and what you could put in practice is something, it's not easy, but I believe that helped us as family and brought us together every week. And now it's 6 months that we are nearly with the church, and we feel like it's been long, we feel like it's just grown into us. So so that's what.
That's been our journey so far. We are still discovering things. We are still learning things. I really like the concept about community that this church has got, which really speaks to us.